Hello and welcome to another episode of DSU Inside Perspective. I'm Carlos Holmes, and this is the show where we talk to faculty, staff, students, alumni about their areas of expertise or even about things that are going on in the world. Today we're talking about world history, and we're very pleased to have Dr. Susmita Roye here, who is an associate professor of English, who has edited a book and also contributed the introduction and a chapter to this book. And the book's called The Male Empire Under the Female Gaze. We're talking about India. We're talking about the British domination of India, especially after the Indian rebellion that took place, often called the Indian Mutiny, in 1857. And that resulted in Britain coming in and actually, through government, creating a new dominance era in which they were the governing body, essentially, of India for the next almost 100 years. This book has a really interesting title, The Male Empire Under the Female Gaze. What is this book about?
Okay, first of all, thank you for having me on this show. And yes, we were like thinking about it. I was like, I'm really fascinated with the idea of the, white women who actually went to India, lived in India, and were a part of the British rule in India. But then we always see how the white woman is shown or is seen in the different writings. So we came up with I and my co-editor, Dr. Mithapalli, we came up with this idea that we also have to see the other way around. And yeah, I'm not the first one to think about it, and hopefully I'm not the last one either. So what is happening is this: the empire is mostly male. Why male? Because it's male-dominated affair, it's a male-centered affair. So we were thinking, what about the female side of it? There were lots of white women who were out there. So how do they look at the enterprise and the endeavor of their men? Do you see what I mean? So it's, well, very, very appropriately for this show, the insight perspective.
All right.
Right. So here we have the male empire, but we have taken the other way around, and we are trying to see how the Mem Sahib, and that's the word you've put up over there, who means, I mean, the white women in British India were called the Mem Sahib. So how the Mem Sahib looks at the British Raj, and the subtitle also says the British Raj. Raj means rule in Hindi. So in other words, it actually is showing how did the white women living in British India look at what their men were doing,
Their
as
perspective.
their perspective.
Right.
So what they were doing to the empire or during the empire, or how they were ruling India, and what their ideas are. So
what was the way you derived this gaze, this perspective? What did you use to understand
Okay,
that?
obviously, so we are so many years away from that portion, that time period in history. So what we did is we started delving into their writings. So we started looking at their travelogues, their letters, their memoirs, their short stories, novels, and what have you. So we started looking at these things, and we started to kind of glean out of that their perspective and to delineate in that their quote-unquote gaze.
Now, there was a particular chapter that you particularly wrote to
Right,
this,
yes.
and you looked at two particular books, one called On the Face of Waters, and the other one, The King's Well. And in reading that chapter, I noticed you were looking at the voice of the woman, and the author, the female author that was writing these fictitious pieces,
Exactly.
but they were relating to the Indian Mutiny that
Exactly.
took place in 1857. And you noted that there were instances where she was using a masculine voice. Explain that, when you say masculine voice.
Okay, yeah.
Female using a masculine
Right,
voice.
exactly. So, yeah, I was interested in this particular watershed event in British Indian history, which is the mutiny, as you pointed out in the introduction, that, it was a mutiny where the Indians were kind of, at one point of time, they decided that they just wanted to get freedom from British rule. I mean, Britain was not the government was not ruling before 1857, but Britain was still under the East India Company. So they decided that they wanted to throw off the British yoke, and that's where the Indian Mutiny started in 1857. Now, usually, Mr. Holmes, the way it is portrayed is, the white men, they were few in number. The white women had become an encumbrance on them. I mean, had the white women not been there, we British men are so manly, we could have just gone and crushed the natives and, what have you. But then So the usual story is there are these natives who are rapacious, who are lascivious, who want to go and rape the white women, and because of the white women, the British men cannot go out and rescue and all that. So what I did was I started looking at how a Mem Sahib writer looks at this particular story. So basically, in the mutiny tales written by the men and spread in the media at that time via poetry and novels and short stories and newspaper articles, it seemed that the Mem Sahib was a passive person, and I mean she was very passive in her role. She was just waiting to be rescued by a white gentleman who would come and rescue her, and she was obviously more often than not just becoming the victim of a brown rapist. So here I see that Florine Steele, who lived in India for 22 years, so she does some research of her own in the different archives, and she comes up with the material and she writes these two stories. And she has written other stories about the mutiny, but I was fascinated with her novel, On the Face of the Waters, which has become a classic novel. Everybody who knows about Florine Steele has heard of her novel. So that is called the Mutiny novel, and she tries to show that women were maybe, women perhaps were not that passive as the male writers and the male representatives show them to be. So here in her novel, she shows a woman who is not at all, victimized by any brown rapist. On the other hand, every time she is in danger, she rescues herself. She is not the damsel in distress waiting for the knight in shining armor to come to her and rescue her.
In fact, her story kind of makes the male kind of Johnny come lately here. They're not quite on time with where they need to be in protecting the women.
Right. So, whenever Douglas comes, it's later. So the second one, The King's Well, is where she takes the masculine voice. She makes a male narrator tell the story. And you know what the story is? The male narrator, the white Englishman, is in trouble, and it's an Indian woman who comes and rescues him. I mean, just imagine how she subverts the entire idea of women being passive and victims and men being masculine and whatnot. So that's, again, the female gaze, assessing the role of the male empire.
Well, we could probably devote more time to this.
Yeah, absolutely.
But tell our viewers how they can get this book. Can they get this online?
Yeah, absolutely. The best way, it was published by Cambria Press in New York, so you can always go and you can, get the information online, and of course, it is also here at Delaware State Library, our own, campus library.
Amazon.com?
And it can be on Amazon.com, anywhere else, Barnes & Nobles and any other bookstore.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Roye, for joining us today.
Thank you
and
very much.
thank you for joining us here on DSU Inside Perspective. Y'all have a good day now.